Welcome to another Rooftop review, and this is the first time we will have reviewed a budget phone on a rooftop here in our secret location in Latin America. This is the Xperia L4, and what I want to know in this video is, first of all, is it any good? And second of all, does it have any of the magic carried over from its bigger brother, the Xperia 1 Mark II, which is my phone of the year so far? Let's see if any of that magic, that Sony DNA, has worked its way into the L4, and let's find out what it's like as a daily driver. Before I get into this one, of course, please do go ahead, subscribe and smash the notification bell, because, and this is a bit of a hint, it's Pixel time, isn't it? Just around the corner now. We're going to be giving you all of our Pixel 5 content, and then our Xperia 5 Mark II content is kind of in the middle of all of that. It's all going on, and then we've got the iPhones. Anyway, without any further ado, here's my full review of the Xperia L4. Let's talk about the design here on the Xperia L4. 21:9 is the obvious starting point, and in that sense, yes, it does carry over some of the magic from the expensive Xperia 1 Mark II. Before we really get into anything, actually, I should say the price of this right now is just over £150 in the UK. That makes it very, very affordable. The price of the Xperia 1 Mark II is £1,200, although there are some cracking deals out there. I'm actually going to list a few of them in a description below, so you know what I'm talking about here. But anyway, 21:9, that's a good start, because even though initially when Sony said they were going down this route, I thought, oh no, I'm never going to get into that. Actually, I couldn't be more into that, and it works for reasons I'll get into later in the video. But anyway, 21:9, success. Headphone jack, can you see that? This is a high altitude review, and it's not too easy for Andrés always to be able to get in there. I love the fact that there's a headphone jack here. We have a fingerprint scanner on the side, power button here, volume rocker of course. Right down here, USB Type-C, which is great, and the mono firing speaker there at the bottom, which is actually nice and powerful. I like that. I mean, this isn't the last word in audio quality, but it sounds good enough. Let's turn things over onto the back, and you'll see we have got the triple camera setup, which is fantastic. It's not, you know, obviously going to be right up there with the Xperia 1 Mark II, but it's not bad, and I'm going to get into more detail on the camera setup, of course, later in the review. NFC, nice to see that. It's doesn't feel super premium. But what I will say though, is it feels great in the hand. It's a good looking phone. It looks good for this price point. That is definitely a fact. Xperia branding at the bottom here as well. Yeah, I think design wise, this is a very, very good looking phone for the money. On the front though, you will notice on this display, we are I don't know if you can see it, because when I come onto the negatives here, one of the ones I'm going to mention is the display, because it's really not very bright. It's at the absolute minimum of acceptable, I would say, at this price point. But we do have a notch. That's a little bit unfortunate. I really got into the Sony way of doing things on the 10 Mark II, the 5 Mark II, 1 Mark II, where it's just this total respect for the content, and it really, the design gets itself out of the way. No punch hole, no notch, nothing like that. We do have that here. It's not the end of the world. I mean, no one really seems to worry about it on the iPhone, but generally speaking, I prefer the Sony approach with the other handsets they have in the range. So it's a 6.2-inch display, 720p, and do you know what? I think it's a very good-looking, respectable display at this price point. Sony could have been tempted to push up the resolution a little bit, but I'm glad they didn't, because then all that's really going to happen is you're going to have worse battery life. And actually the battery life on this I'm going to come on to later, but it's more than enough to get you through a day, so that works out well for me. It's a nice looking display, but as I said earlier, when you get out into the sunshine, my goodness, it really does struggle on a hot sunny day. it's really worth bearing that in mind, because that is a very real thing. I think for me actually, that's probably the number one gripe I have with, actually it's the number one or number two gripe. The other gripe is the software situation, but we're going to come on to that later. But I like this display. Now Sony says 21:9 is great for watching back movies, and I agree, it is. Although the notch here does kind of spoil that a bit, and also the bezels are a bit on the chunky side. This bezel here is actually a bit chunkier than all the others as well. Again, let's be real here. This is not an expensive handset, far from it. So actually, in the scheme of things, I don't have a terrific problem with any of those things whatsoever. But what I will say about this display and the aspect ratio in general is, yes, it's true, it's great for multitasking, but also I do find that most of the time when watching YouTube, I just go full screen, and I just prefer it that way. Yes, you do lose a bit top and bottom, but it's a good trade-off. I mean, it really does look very cool. Actually, the 21:9 aspect ratio, it actually makes the whole phone feel more modern and more expensive than it actually is. One of the things I really like about the design here is that we can pop in an SD card, and that means if you want more than the 64 gigs of internal storage, you can have more, quite a lot more, actually half a terabyte more. That's a nice touch. I also like the fact you don't need one of those pesky SIM ejector tools to flip it open. You just need to not bite your fingernails like I am trying not to do. So let's talk about performance, because powering this device is the MediaTek MT6762 paired with 3 gigs of RAM. Is that enough? I would say it is enough, but only just. If you are a power user or a heavy gamer, you're going to want more power, of course. But actually, do you know what? That's not what this phone is all about. It's not intended for that kind of user, so I think it's perfectly acceptable at this price point. Now let's talk about the operating system, because actually the more I think about it, this is my number one gripe. It's great. I mean, I love Android, as you know. The thing is though, we're not talking about Android 11 here. That would be unfair, of course. It's only just come out with the Pixel. We're not talking about Android 10 though either, and that's part of the problem. We're talking about Android 9. Remember Android Pie back in the day? But the thing is, it isn't just that. There's no clarity as of yet. And if I'm wrong on this, I'm going to put something in the video description below. But there's no clarity from Sony as to whether or not this will get proper updates. And I would argue that is very, very important. I applaud Sony for taking care of the hardware as well as they do when it comes to the battery, which is actually the next chapter here. But it isn't just the physical device that needs to be kept in, tip-top working condition. It's the software experience as well. I would love to see Sony address this, and to be absolutely clear, this is how many upgrades you're going to get, and these are the, this is our commitment to monthly security patches, all that kind of stuff. I think once they share that information with us, we will be in a better position. But right now, it seems to be impossible to find out. I'm going to ask Sony actually, and hopefully I can get an answer for you. Just before we move on to battery life though, I just want to say in terms of the Android 9 situation here, it's worth bearing in mind that you will not get things like dark support, dark mode support. That's okay in my opinion, because because my other major gripe with this phone is the display not being as bright as I would like. As I said before, it is acceptable, but it's at the very, very lowest point of acceptable. But putting all of this into dark mode would make it very difficult to see once you get outside on a bright day. So that's not too bad, at least. Now let's talk about the dreaded bloatware. It's not as bad as, remember the Samsung TouchWiz days? I mean, that was pretty horrific, wasn't it? And we've seen worse. There is a bit of bloatware on here. I don't like it. Whenever these apps appear that you just can't get rid of, it does bug me. I wish that wasn't a thing. Is it acceptable at this price point? I'd argue, no, not really. It's never really, I just don't like it. I mean, do you think it's acceptable? If you do, let me know in the comments section below. So let's talk about the battery life here. As I said before, this is enough to get you through a full day. And in that sense, I'm not worried about, whether it's the biggest in class. Having said that, there are others with bigger batteries at more or less this price range, like for example the Redmi Note 9, which actually we have in the studio right now, and I'm doing some stuff on that, comparing it with the Samsung A51, for example. All of these phones are in the same sort of price bracket, so make sure you stay tuned and subbed for that. Yes, it gets you through a day no problem, and Sony's battery care technology makes sure that the battery is looked after for the long term. I like that very much. Fast charge as well, that's great. The 3,850 milliamp hour battery here is good enough. It does the job. I'm very happy with it. It's a good size. Enough said. Next chapter. So the triple lens setup on the back here is flush with the back of the phone. That's exactly the way I like it. I wish it was like that all the time, you know, with every phone that we review. But anyway, I just like that. 13 megapixel main camera. Sony knows a thing or two when it comes to color science. So as you'd expect, the colors here generally are pretty natural looking. I'm not going to pretend for a second that this is a really, really competent setup, but it looks good on the back of the phone. And as you can see here from these pictures, they're not bad, are they? You will need good lighting conditions to get really good results, and things like HDR settings, you can, I mean, I wouldn't say ignore them, by all means try them out, but don't expect really, really pro type results. I mean, for example, there isn't a pro mode here, but I don't think there should be either. It's a very competent snapper for most people. So there's a 5 megapixel ultra wide if you want to try that out. It's a nice little effect, and 2 megapixel depth sensor here as well. So if you want portraits that have that sort of depth of field, that luxurious creamy background that just really, really does make a portrait look the part, well, that's here as well. I mean, it's not the last word in, you know, looking absolutely amazing, but I think it's very respectable at this price point. So the 8 megapixel front facing camera is actually pretty good, I think, at this price point. And that, funnily enough, was one of my biggest gripes when it comes to the Xperia 1 Mark II. I didn't think that selfie camera was good enough for the money. This one is. So recording HD video is actually pretty good on this little device. I like it very much. The results are not spectacular, but again, at this price point, I think these are more than acceptable. So what I want to do now is wrap this one up and tell you whether or not I can recommend this device. The first thing I'm going to say is, you'll hear a lot of the time tech YouTubers talk about the problem of the power button not being in the same place as the fingerprint scanner. I think one of the reasons why they tend to say that is because most of the time they will be reviewing high-end or upper mid-range devices, and that kind of thing really hits hard. What we need to remember is that if you're in the market for this device, you're not going to be coming from a flagship. It's highly unlikely. And I would argue that the fingerprint scanner is absolutely fine, because you'll get used to it in no time. It actually works very well. It's very accurate. It reads very well. So I don't think that's a problem. It keeps being flagged as a problem, but I don't think it is really a problem. The other thing is that the device is too tall. Let's just deal with this one properly. This device is not too tall. What Sony's done here is they've done exactly what they did with the Xperia 1 Mark II. It's a big phone, sure, 6.2 inches is, you know, hefty, but that 21:9 form factor makes this phone really easy to handle. When you then throw in one-handed mode and all the rest of it, this is absolutely fine. No problems there whatsoever. It's a great daily driver at this price point. I think the bigger question is, how does it compete with the Samsung A51, for example, the new Note 9, the Redmi Note 9 there? That's where it gets really tricky, because if you're willing to spend even just a tiny bit more, you can get quite a bit more in some areas. So stay tuned, and I'll show you in the next few videos that we do just how good this phone is versus the competition at a similar price point, because we do have both of those phones in the studio right now, so those videos are coming up. Anyway, would I recommend this phone? I would say, if you're one of those people that gets a warm feeling from that Sony brand, that brand name, and a lot of people do, I've noticed in the comments, a lot of people do, then this is a really nice way of getting into the Xperia ecosystem, into the Xperia way of doing things without breaking the bank. Far from it. This is very, very affordable. So yeah, it has got a bit of that Xperia 1 Mark II magic. I do like it, but the one thing holding me back from saying, do you know what, it's a great deal, go ahead and find yourself one, is this issue with it coming with Android 9 and not knowing if there's going to be an update or two and when they're going to happen. I would like to know that before I can think about recommending it. So that's as upfront as I can possibly be about this device. I do like it, and it's almost a recommend, and it might be if I can just get that information. I will ask Sony, and if I get any information, I'll let you know in the comments section below. Thank you so much for watching another Rooftop review. I'll see you next time.